Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Bill, how are you doing?
This is awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. How was your day today?
It was pretty cool. I want to thank Richard for hosting. Where'd you go, Richard? BrainStation is like one of the stable places in the city to really kind of get education on this kind of stuff. So it's really a pleasure to be here. And it's been a full day because we probably had chock-a-block meetings with a whole bunch of companies looking at how they can get involved with the digital supercluster.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll talk about that for sure. But let's maybe start a bit earlier than that. So, when you graduated from school, what was your vision or your career goal at that point? And have you ever foreseen that you're in this position here right now?
I don't know. I was probably like just when you guys graduated from school. Did you know what you were going to do? Raise your hand if you did. Okay, you were an outlier. I had absolutely no idea. Absolutely no idea. So actually, I was going to take just general sciences, going to university. And my dad said, absolutely no way, I'm paying for that. You're going to have to go to engineering school, which I wasn't particularly good at. But I went to McGill, did my engineering degree in electrical. And I guess I fell into doing telecommunications control systems. I wasn't particularly good as an engineer, but I would say I love the product side of it. And when I finished, I was lucky enough to get a job at Bell Canada, which in the 90s was probably the place to work. When you think about back in the 90s, telecom was sort of the first wave of stuff that was happening. That's where all the financing was going. And I was lucky enough to do a bunch of different startups, and both with large companies and with and separately as brand new startups there. And I'd say that probably taught a lot of the background around just figuring out what it is that people want, building products around that kind of need, and then just the cycles for iterating on that stuff are a lot longer than they are now. But it's the same basic principle around how you got to build products and understand how people use it.
Did you learn anything in school?
Did I learn anything in school? That's a good question. I think what I learned was the best thing I could do at school was to surround myself with people that were way smarter around technical, around engineering in particular, because that's what makes for good teams. Is if everyone is just like you, it's not the same thing. And I was fortunate enough to kind of work with a whole bunch of people, whether it was in lab environments or kind of design things where they did all of that while I I tried to contribute by being a good writer, which in the end, I think being a good writer actually helps you in explaining your product and explaining what the proposition is, and ultimately helping you, if you're starting a business, to actually have that value proposition that people can understand.
The value proposition part, yeah, I think that's a very important one, of course, and I think you have some stories to share around that as well. But so, for example, let's talk about your involvement in Metrocom, which was probably one of the most successful experiences you had. And what was the success story of Metrocom?
So, I have to go back. It's been 20 years since I did Metrocom, but the circumstances lead you to opportunities, and I think the key is when these opportunities arise, you find every way of saying yes to them. Before that, I was working at Rogers, and at Rogers back in the mid-90s, that was sort of the wave in which Rogers was trying to get into broadband. So anyone that actually was trying to use early internet stuff knew that it was super slow back then because everyone was using dial-up. Broadband on cable was a brand new thing. And I was fortunate enough to kind of work in a whole bunch of startups within larger companies where they were prepared to put millions of dollars into experimental stuff. And one of the things we were trying to do while I was at Rogers was build out a brand new fiber-based telecom network. And frankly, they didn't have the money to do it. Ted Rogers at the time was in a mountain of debt, and there was just no way he was going to be able to build a successful telecom company. Now, fortunately, one of his executives was a fellow who mentored me through a past life when I was working at Bell, and he said, you know, I've got this deal I want to do. It's based in Calgary. It's a metropolitan fiber network. I think if you come join me, we can build this into a national telecom company. We'll build fiber coast to coast, and we can compete with TELUS and Bell and everyone else. And I don't know, I was like 25, 26 years old, and I'm thinking, you know, I got this job, I'm getting paid for all this stuff working at Rogers, and I thought, what the heck, you know, I got nothing to lose. I'll just kind of jump into this new thing. There were 8 people at the company at the time. I didn't know anything about a startup. I didn't know how venture capital worked or whatever. And sure enough, he plucked this 20-some-odd-year-old kid. He was probably in his late 40s or 50s. He made me the chief product officer, the chief marketing officer for the business. Now, fortunately, I learned a ton of things through that. We raised probably about $1 billion of capital over the course of 18 months. I have the responsibility with my excessive experience of almost 6 years in telecom. I was charged with the responsibility of building the entire product portfolio and hiring all the people to do that. And it was like, you know, I was just making it up as you go along, and you pretend that you're confident enough to know what you're doing, but half the time you're scared shitless because you're afraid someone's gonna rat you out or find out for sure. But, you know, in the end, the best way to learn is by doing, and to surround yourself with people that you can trust well enough to kind of ask the questions to. So we built up a product, we did brochures, like, you know, it's funny, when you're raising money for a telecom company back then, especially if you come from Canada, the US was already 18 months to 24 months ahead of us, so they really understood the idea of building alternative and competitive networks that were based on fiber optics, and there was tons of capital that was flowing into those deals. But in Canada, you know, that was not happening. So we raised, I think it was $50 million to start from venture, actually 2 venture funds. One was Ontario Teachers Pension Plan. They used to actually invest in venture. And then a very small Rhode Island-based venture fund called Providence, which now is Providence Equity, one of the largest buyout firms in the entire world. But back then they were a tiny little thing, maybe a few $100 million under management. And we raised some money with them, and they said, look, take the roadshow down to the US, and all you gotta do is you gotta explain that it's a telecom play, and show pictures that you actually have cities in Canada, like just show tall buildings. And that was the deal, that was our roadshow. It was like, yeah, the American investors, and apologies to anyone who might be from the US, but let's say 20 years ago, they weren't necessarily as educated about Canada as they might be now. But they thought, you know, Canada's a nice place, there's nothing there, it's like dirt roads, and everyone still, you know, gets to work on snowmobiles or whatever. But there are no cities, and there's no point in laying fiber optic cable everywhere because there's just no population. And so all we had to do was show pictures of the 5 biggest cities, and that we were going to do this, and here's the formula for making money. And we cranked out on the very first deal with less than $1 million in revenue, we cranked out a $250 million financing on that story. So this comes back to your question about, you know, you might not be the best engineer, but if you can figure out a way to write and tell good stories and build a value proposition on it, believe it or not, people will believe you, and then they'll put the faith in you and they'll invest in you. So we're fortunate enough to do that, and then of course we built off the backs of raising that capital, the rest of the network. And through that whole exercise, an amazing part of the story is we were maybe about $5 million in revenue. $5 million. So over the course of about a year, we went from $1 million to $5 million. So most people would say that's pretty good growth. That's like 500 times. The problem was that our capitalization was far in excess of where we were, and yet because the market was so hot in the late 90s, we found ourselves in a position where we could actually raise more money. And we actually went public on roughly about $6 million in revenue with a valuation that ended up being close to $1 billion. Can you imagine that today? Like, that would not happen. This was in 1997. So roughly 20 months after I started at this startup with 8 people, we went public and we were about 100 people by then. So I hope that you guys all have that opportunity to ride that rocket ship, because it doesn't happen very often. And when we did raise that money, we went back to my past company, so Rogers, the people that work there, and we said, hey, we want to buy out your assets. Can you imagine, like this plucky little company that just started 2 years ago, goes back to the major cable companies, we're going to buy out all of your telecom assets. Oh, by the way, we'll give you 35% of the ownership stake in our business. And believe it or not, they said yes. And it turned out that whole day, we ended up with a business that in roughly about 1999, around 2000, sold to AT&T. It was worth $4.5 billion. And so Ted Rogers got out of debt because he owned a share in that business, and they laughed all the way to the bank on that deal. And AT&T ended up buying us, and you know, the rest is kind of history, but it just kind of shows that with that kind of story, I wouldn't say that was because anyone in that equation was necessarily the smartest person in the room, or you know, or there was something particularly special about what we were doing. A lot of it is being in the right place at the right time, and then having the right people with you. That's what actually breeds success.
Right, yeah, so obviously that was during the dot-com bubble, and so there was a lot of money involved in a lot of businesses, locations. So after that bubble burst, how did AT&T do?
So again, surrounding yourself with really smart people is kind of important, because our CEO at the time was super bright at structuring the deal. So even after AT&T bought it, there still is, for anyone in telecom, they would know that there's foreign ownership restrictions. And so AT&T in the US actually couldn't own 100% of the business. And so you would think that, okay, so the rest of the part of the business, that half, or roughly 52% that they couldn't own, what happened to that? Well, we kind of set a price that said that it could never go down below a certain number until such a time as they changed regulation. So meanwhile, the stock market is crashing like this, and our stock is going up. Go figure, like that defies gravity. And so that whole thing gave all of us that were still involved in the company, because anytime you go through an M&A, you're kind of locked in, especially if you own the keys. So I was probably locked in for a couple of years. And I quite enjoyed working at AT&T. It was a good company to work with. And they were trying to experiment with the new domain, I'll call it certainly e-commerce 1.0, or not even 1.0, 0.1. And so the model was actually really tough. It was, pets.com, if everyone remembers that, maybe you don't. Like none of that stuff really worked, because it all kind of worked on a flimsy model of how you would actually get products out to you. And we were working on business-to-business e-commerce, or it was basically called e-business at the time. But again, you find yourself in these opportunities where you get to experiment a little bit in the environment of large companies, where they have lots more money to put at play. And you learn as much as you possibly can, so that by the time you get a chance to do the next startup, you can apply all of that to be better at that job.
So then after your AT&T, I think you went on and going on to the investor side. How was that for you? How was that experience? What was the most surprising thing you found?
Yeah, so you find in your career trajectory there are many points in time where you get a new batch of humility, and I think being an investor was like that new batch. So myself and a bunch of the other folks that were part of the founding team at Metrocom thought, we didn't fully respect the fact that we were just lucky and our timing was good. Like, we thought we actually did something particularly special. And so we threw our money together and we raised some institutional capital. We ended up with it was a $22, $23 million fund. And we thought we would do what it wasn't kind of known then as seed, but we were doing seed investments in companies. And we were doing it with this idea that, hey, we're operators, we're going to add value to the investments. And I was just actually starting a family, so it seemed like the perfect balance. I would do investments, I would advise, and then we would hit the bottom of the market. So we started that fund in the back half of 2001. So we thought the whole market had bottomed, and we would find a way to kind of increase value. The fact is, we were 18 months too early. The market really didn't fully bottom out until about 2003. All the investments we did at the front end of this were like failed exercises. We got there was a shiny object syndrome problem with our investments that didn't follow a common thesis. And the biggest thing with being an investor is you're not supposed to be the smart person in the room. That's what the company is, right? That you're betting on the people. So, you know, as an investor, your job is to open a whole bunch of doors for them, to have them go faster because of the networks that you can provide. Well, we kind of missed that lesson in that. And so we wrote off probably the first third of our investments just because we weren't particularly good at it. It wasn't until the back half of the investing cycles that we actually understood how to do this, which is why anyone who's interested in doing a venture fund, there's a lot to learn as a first-time venture investor. And that's why oftentimes institutional capital has difficulty with funding first-time VCs, is that they know they're going to burn through some important and unmistakable lessons in the first half of their investment experience. And we certainly did that. But I came to realize a couple things in that investment piece. One, I wasn't particularly satisfied being a board member. It just wasn't ideal. And I think for me, it was really, how do I get back into the entrepreneurship game? And so after about, I'd say, 4.5 years of being an investor, I kind of pulled the chute and ended up doing my next startup.
Which was Echo.
It was Echo, and you know, Ralph, I have to give you credit. Like a lot of people say, EQO communications. We spent way too much time trying to find a URL that was cutesy and represented what we were trying to do, which was really, we're one of the first apps that did Skype on mobile, which, back in 2005, 2006 was kind of a big deal. This was before everyone had apps on phones. It was super hard to do it. To do an app on what used to be Java-based handsets or Nokia handsets. Remember Nokia? Well, some of you will. They were the big handset providers, right? It was really hard to you'd have to sideload these things, you'd have to put special websites, but we're the first ones to actually make something happen. And we tried to find a URL that was, like taking Skype on the road and taking your identity on the road, and we finally landed on Echo. But of course, all of the domains were gone except this one that said EQO. So we bought it, only to realize that everybody and their brother would actually pronounce it in the wrong way. So you're among the 10%. You're definitely
I try my best. So then in your role as an investor and then again being CEO at Echo, right? So being on the entrepreneurial side again, what do you think the most startup founders, what kind of mistake do they make?
So I was lucky on that one that the founder for that one, because I joined just after it got started, but I was already advising the company. So it was fairly easy for me to kind of take the reins as CEO. But it's really important that you kind of have at least 2 people, preferably 3 when you start a company, because everyone's going to bring something a little bit different. If you end up founding the company on your own and you're kind of doing the startup on your own, you find it's an incredibly difficult journey. And if you're raising VC funding, it's actually, believe it or not, kind of a strike against you. So I'd say number 1 lesson would be to make sure that you've got a good core team to start with, because whether you're raising money or you're just trying to figure out how to execute, that's going to be a fundamental asset for you.
Why did you see you shouldn't start raising VC money?
What? Sorry, what was it?
Why did you say you shouldn't start raising VC money?
Oh, no. What I said was that the VCs will look at whether you've got a full built-out team, or at least you've got more than one person as one of the great things in evaluating this.
Right. So with Echo, I think you said that the product market fit at that point wasn't the right one.
Yeah. So for us, because we were trying to build these apps on, as I said, Nokia handsets and things that weren't, there was no such thing as an app store back then. So the people that were downloading this stuff were hobbyists. And any hobbyist market, you're going to get good uptake. This is the 3% of the market of people who are willing to go out and experiment with stuff that doesn't work particularly well. And they'll give you accolades, and you'll believe that you have something really special, but you don't. You really don't. And, and so you delude yourself. we had, in the 2 years we were doing this, we ended up with over 3 million users on our platform. And now, back then, valuations, again, the problem is that you take the lessons from the telecom era that I was in, where you kind of have this hype cycle. So you believe that the underlying metrics on this business was users. Because around that same time, eBay bought Skype for $2.6 billion. And I actually, I took an afternoon and I sort of tried to backwards calculate how they got to that number. And it worked out roughly to about $50 a user, right? So the economics on that stuff was, didn't care if those users were actually monetizable, but the fact that they had, however many users was roughly about $50 a user. And so that delusion point in terms of value per user all cratered when things didn't work out after. There was a kind of a downturn in 2008. I don't know if you guys all remember that, but it was fairly significant if you're running a company that isn't making any money and you're actually spending money to acquire customers. I don't really care that you've got 3 million because you're not able to monetize it and you don't kind of finish off the other side. So the product market fit is really a question of, do you understand how ultimately this becomes a business? And we didn't understand that well enough, so we were acquiring customers, but probably bleeding them out as fast as they were coming in on one side. And that's where I think the challenge often is for startups, is to understand not just whether or not you can acquire them, but what is the utilization around the stuff that you're offering as a product, and what is it that gives you confidence to say that at some point you can actually turn those relationships into something that has a monetary value.
And with Echo, what was the critical inflection point when you said, okay, that's that?
The critical inflection point was sitting at SFO at the San Francisco airport in September after doing a bunch of Series B meetings with VCs in the Valley and watching the news when Lehman Brothers goes in the toilet. So that was a pretty key inflection point where I went, oh, I really should have listened to the guys at NEA who told me 6 months prior that you better raise your money now because you're not going to see it at the end of the year. They already knew, but we didn't move fast enough on that deal. So by the time things kind of came on the other side, all we could do was salvage what we had, so we sold the business for what we could, but it wasn't the outcome that we were hoping for.
So and then you needed a break?
I did. I checked out for about 6 months. I took the family around. We did a trip around the world, and it really was an opportunity to decompress. And then coming back, it was, okay, I could do a bunch more startups. A bunch of people were saying, well, you should get back into venture stuff, which I said I would never do as a VC. But ultimately, I think the VC Tech Association, back then it was called the VCTIA, was just starting up this whole mentorship thing. And I think for most people who have kind of been around the scene on accelerators and mentorship stuff, it all kind of happened as the backdrop of what happened in the downturn, right? That's when I think the real spark around entrepreneurship, startups really happened around then. It wasn't that there wasn't a previous wave of it. It became much more a critical point in time where people recognized that the economy was not going to come back in the way it was before then. And so for an awful lot of us that were kind of watching this stuff, we said, well, it's a bit like the ethos that you showed a little bit earlier about startup grind, right? The idea is as you've been a benefactor of this whole startup thing, it's incumbent on you to find a way to pay it forward. And mentorship and support organizations like VC Tech Association, many others, it's all about finding vehicles for people who've kind of been through the journey to help the next generation of folks to kind of find their pathways and hopefully find them faster, hopefully through the lessons that you kind of had to bear on the chin.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to ask you about your journey. Did you learn anything interesting for your future path on your trip around the world?
Oh gosh, lots. I mean, I don't even know where to start. I suppose I would start with the food, right? The food. You can find some awesome places to eat when you go around the world. But I think the big thing was really the exposure that we really do have a lot of things that we take for granted when we live here. We're kind of living right beside the slums when we were in India, and really trying to give my kids at the time the sense that privilege is something that we take for granted. And it helps to kind of have that every so often as a checkpoint, because no matter how big the problems are, you kind of reflect on the day that you had today, and maybe not everything went your way, but if you actually can take the moment in time to actually reflect on how your day compared to maybe others, it might give you a bit more perspective. And that I think was sort of the most important aspect of our trip. Plus the fact that we got to go to Egypt before it got all torn down, which, not torn down, but I think when you're watching how they're uncovering all the ruins, and it's a magical thing as they're doing it. And now I think a lot of the uprising back in 2011 has really changed that a lot.
Okay, so then you were back in Vancouver and started at the Center for Growth and BC Tech. And yeah, you've been, what was the most the most interesting lesson you learned there from all the startups you've mentored?
What's the most interesting lesson? I'd say, it's funny, when I knew nothing about being in a nonprofit organization. Everything I'd ever done was sort of singularly focused on how do you grab market share, how do you build a product that people want, and how do you scale the business. When you're part of something like the BC Tech Association or any sort of nonprofit organization, you have a very different remit. So your remit is for the stakeholders that you have, what is it that you can do to best deliver value in the experiences or challenges that they express? And what I found was that the tech community back in 2010, 2011 was, for the most part, I think the energy was there, but I don't think it had surfaced to the point that I think it is now. So there's all this untapped potential that people couldn't see themselves in the bigger picture. So everyone was doing their own thing. It was pretty siloed, I think. Not because there just weren't the platforms. There weren't things like this, right? BrainStation wasn't there. Bread Academy wasn't around. The guys at Launch Academy, none of that stuff was around. So what you had was well-meaning people who constantly sat on an airplane going back and forth to the valley or some other place and kind of find their juice. And what we needed to do was build this idea of community connections, because local connectedness is a prerequisite for long-term success in an ecosystem. It's been written about more so in the last little while, but I think it's long been our belief system that if you can't get people together to kind of find ways to work together, to make it so that there's some permanence in the stuff that they're doing in the locality that they're in, then it's all going to be, fleeting. And anything that's fleeting says, without the permanence, there isn't will. And so somehow we had to bridge those things. And so I think the biggest lesson is when you can get people together and you can share stories and talk about what it is that you learn, and other people actually, can react to it and they can kind of add to the conversation, and you just build the space for that to happen. You find the human connection actually endears this whole idea of a sense of belonging and actually creates a stronger sense of purpose and will. And it took probably 5 years or so, and I think it's a journey that's taken many groups, many organizations kind of believing in the same thing. And we have one specific outcome in mind. There's in the world, there's probably 250 metropolitan areas, cities, if you will, that are all vying to be the next tech hub, right? They're all there. And Vancouver, for the most part, back in 2010, 2011, would have languished maybe in the top 25%, maybe the top 50 or so of these cities. The question is, how do we get to become a top 10 player? Because, you look at everything that's out there around the power law. Power law says, if you're a platform like Amazon, you're going to capture more than 40% share of the total market. The top 3 usually account for 80%, 60%, the top 10 account for 80% of the share. So if you're not in the top 10 and you're fighting everyone else for the last 20%, these are Vancouver's much better than that. We've got to find a way to be at the top of the food chain, not in the middle somewhere. And the only way to do that is to kind of express our purpose through an ethos that's not dissimilar to yours. We built a value system that was predicated on 3 things. Number 1 was be of service. right? Sound familiar? Number 2 was succeed together. And number 3 was pay it forward. And that became sort of the galvanizing piece by which we define our community service and the multiple stakeholders that we had. And there's been some good momentum since, and we hope that this will continue to elevate us. In 2015 was the highlight of that because we became, in the startup genome study that was done, we ascended to number 15 in the world as startup ecosystem, and we became the number 1 startup ecosystem in Canada. So we actually edged out. I'm from Toronto, so I take personal pride in that. And it's a fun thing, right? Like, all ranking systems are flawed, but if you can take pride every so often in things that you look back and achieve, like everyone in this community should feel a sense of pride of being part of that and take that to the next level. So from number 15, I think we can get to number 10, and then beyond number 10. So that's really the goal that we had set up for ourselves.
Yeah, for Vancouver, I mean, it's also, they take into account the living situation and the lifestyle here, right? So it's kind of neat, but it's an unfair advantage for Vancouver because it's so beautiful, right?
Yeah, it is. But, you know, I also, one of the benefits of being in the BC Tech Association is you get an awful lot of people that come through wanting to connect into the tech community. And it doesn't matter if they're, you know, maybe working in a different industry set, or they're, you know, foreign nationals, or they're, you know, people that are interested in maybe moving here at some point. And one thing that, I don't know, Ralph, how your experience was, but I think for a lot of people that come for the very first time, they find that networks are hard to break into. So we try to build every possible inroad so that people can feel comfortable. And I think the more you have things like this, and the more that we can kind of embrace people who are coming through. In Vancouver, when I moved here like 15 years ago, was a super rainy place that everyone just wanted to run inside for 6 months of the year. And so you didn't quite have the same, like I think in Calgary before that. So in Calgary, I mean, everyone has dinner parties just about, you know, every other night. You know, barbecue season is, even when it's snowing, the barbecue season never ends. You know, it's just a different ethos. And when we moved into our house in Calgary, all the neighbors came, brought stuff, introduced themselves, and that's how it worked. It doesn't actually happen in Vancouver. That's just not, that wasn't my experience when we moved here. So I think you have to work a little extra harder. You have to work, you have to put that extra effort in to make sure that people that come here are feeling welcome, and that's what will build the same ethos in the next generation of people that do this.
Yeah, I have actually experienced that, yes. People are extremely helpful, I think, here in Vancouver, in my opinion. And because, yeah, also because we have a lot of these organizations helping startup founders, connecting people, and organizations like BC Tech, creating this atmosphere. So what do you think is, have you people also experienced that? Do you think nodding, shaking, not so much? No, we'll get to that. Just feeling the temperature of the room, which is pretty hot actually. So what do you think is still the biggest weakness for Vancouver of being a hub in the world?
So, you know, when you look at the rankings, there's usually about 5 categories you look at. Yeah, the first one, I think the most obvious one, is how are we at access to capital? You know, are companies able to raise the money they need? You know, then they'll measure things like how good is the talent pool there. They'll look at, you know, how robust is the marketplace, the access to customers, and that sort of thing. Then they'll look at things like, what about the support system, the support network that's there? And usually the 5th one is, let's look at connectedness. So connectedness is a measure of, you know, if you needed to get to a particular person, individual, or a particular company, you look at how deep and rich the networks are. So on all those measures, I'd say everything kind of gets adjusted to look at overall performance. It's a measure of all of these things in combination. So in any given year, oftentimes what I heard was people will say, well, there's not enough capital, which is probably true. But capital flows to where performance is demonstrated. And so there's really not a lot of barriers to that if you can demonstrate performance on there's no question we've got really, really good talent here. So what we need is we need to demonstrate the scalability of that talent in the companies that we have and show a lot more success to the top end. We've seen a lot of exits the last 3-4 years, but not enough massive exits to really kind of change the trajectory of the capital piece. And I think that's one of the things that I know a whole bunch of companies are working on. And I've seen actually more conviction in founders, more conviction in the management teams about being able to build scalable, large-scale companies here in Vancouver and British Columbia than I've ever seen. So I think every part of that, sort of that emotional journey, the way in which people are kind of thinking about it, moving in the right direction. But the one thing that I cannot underscore enough is depth of network connections, right? So the one reason why, if I go back to when I was doing Echo, the one reason why it was fairly straightforward it didn't make any logical sense, but why would eBay buy Skype was the question. And you trace it back and say, oh, that's easy, because they had exactly the same VC investor, 6 years, 8 years prior. And you think, okay, so really good VCs have networks that connect the right people to the right opportunities at the right time. And it's not just acquisition stuff, it's hiring people, right? It's like, and that's how it works in the Valley. So what we need to do, our networks here in Vancouver, in Canada broadly, are not nearly as deep. We have to work super hard to make that happen. That's why what we encourage, we actually, when I was at the BC Tech Association, kind of built this, I'll call it sort of a website that aggregates LinkedIn information and some funding information. We call it BC Tech Base. You go to bctechbase.com. And the whole idea on that was we wanted some trend information on all the companies that are here, at least some proxy data on how many people work there, whether they raise money. So think of it as Crunchbase, but localized to British Columbia. And that way, since it's regionally oriented, it gave you a better sense of the overall trend line on stuff. But the most important thing for founders that we used to talk about was, if you're gonna raise capital, and you're thinking about, do your homework, right? Like, you don't want the absence of optionality when it comes to investment. You don't want just one VC that is going to want to invest in you. You want a whole series of them. But when you do figure out the VCs or the investors that you want, look at who else has raised from them, right? And so one of the features of this thing was you can kind of look at the investors, you can look at who invested in them, and then hopefully you can find a way to reach them. And if you couldn't, you'd do it through the Tech Association. You probably would email me and say, hey, do you know so-and-so? Say, yeah, absolutely, you should talk to them. If you're going to think about raising money from Bessemer, or you're thinking about raising from Draper Fisher, or you're thinking of raising from Sequoia, here are the people that come up and, you watch the traffic up YVR. These guys are up, 2-3 times a week, right? So there's a lot of traffic that way. And it's that building the network here locally and knowing that you can rely on the other people in the hood to give you the advice you need, because you're not down there, you're up here, but they've got the intel. And how we pool that intel is the way that we're going to build up those networks in a more robust way.
I want to ask the audience, who here is actually working on their own startup? Quite a few people, it's good. So you talked about building big companies in Vancouver. It's kind of something or having big companies here in Vancouver is kind of lacking right now. Would be key to build a real competitive hub. And I guess that's one vision you have with the digital technology Supercluster. Do you want to share, tell us a little bit more about the Supercluster? What it is and what are your goals and visions for that?
Let me do an audience poll. Has anyone, raise your hand if you've heard of the Supercluster. Now keep your hand up if you know what it is. Okay, great. I'm going to get you two to come up and tell the story about the Supercluster. It is, what I often say about the Supercluster, it is a made in Canada approach to really accelerating the innovation that actually is created here to connect with your customers to build stronger products and platforms that can be sold around the world. In most, especially in Europe, the concept of clusters and building frameworks where companies come together and collaborate, that's been in existence for decades. But it's a concept that we have not done here in Canada. So when the federal government went around and said, hey, we're really falling behind. We're falling behind on a whole bunch of fronts. It's not the startup stuff, it's all the other industry sectors, right? They look at the competitive index on what are, how much is being invested in R&D, what's the productivity outcomes of this stuff. They worry a lot about that because they see the writing on the wall is that in what is often called, what the World Economic Forum describes as the fourth industrial revolution. They see that this role of being a leader in technology is going to underwrite the future success economically and socially for any nation. And that if you're not in the game, if you're not really prepared, you are going to lose out big time. And so they're really worried about that, and they thought that the conditions for changing this would be to, invest about $1 billion into this idea of regional superclusters, which all went down in 2017. That's basically how long the contest, the competition, the program was launched in about May of 2017, has run to about this point this year. So our idea is building on the ethos that I mentioned earlier about how do you build stronger linkages within your community, and how do you tie the constituent players to believe that they can do something more than in their own domain, just simply by working together. That we were able to kind of build that ethos into a bridge into the rest of the business community. So the supercluster we created was actually founded on the needs of the natural resources segment, the health sector, the industrial sectors, how they were going to digitally transform, or at least be relevant in a digital economy. And then layering in different tech companies and capabilities that, whether you're a large or small company or a startup, how you can build technology platforms and products to help to solve these real industrial problems. And through that mechanism, there's a lot of shared goodwill. We're just in the midst of sort of launching our first set of projects, but the idea was that if we can get a mix and the right blend of large companies, large customers, small companies, startup companies, even universities and research organizations, all to kind of co-collaborate on certain types of development projects, that we could actually build world-class products right here, and ultimately attract far more investment and attention here, make ourselves sort of an in-child, if you will, in the world of competitiveness around the top tech ecosystems in the world. So that's what the supercluster is intended to do. We've got about 450 organizations that have signed up to be part of this, a whole bunch of pledged real millions of dollars of investment dollars that they're going to do towards this. I think we ended up with about 500 million or so in commitment dollars that went towards this, plus what the federal government's going to put into this. So in the long run, it'll probably be like close to 750 million to $1 billion of investment into this sort of thing, which in some respects might solve some of the access to capital issues, but to a greater extent will ensure that if you're running a startup today, this is always the issues for us. You're doing a startup, your biggest issue is how do you get, especially you're doing an enterprise startup or a business-to-business startup, how do you get customers? How do you get the Lencors, the Canfors, the tech resources of the world to pay attention to what you're doing? Well, you need a collaboration platform. You need a place where you can create the forcing function of those looking for solutions and those that can provide those solutions. So that's in the long run what we're hoping the supercluster will provide.
Can you share some exciting stories, projects that are going on right now? And so how are, for example, some companies turning data into dollars?
Well, we're still at the early stages of doing what we'll call the first wave of projects. In fact, we just got a set of proposed projects about a week ago that we're looking intently at. The goal is that if if I look at health as a good example, anyone, here's a question we often ask is, raise your hand if the healthcare experience you had when you were a kid compared to the healthcare experience that you had last week when you went in to see the doctor. Raise your hand if you thought it was actually any different. Yeah, it hasn't changed, right? It's exactly the same. And you think about everything else, you know, we used to go into banks, we used to have little pass cards and tell it what stats on, right? The whole banking world has changed a lot, even in the last decade. Like their whole banking experience is far different now than it was 10 years ago. Yet, healthcare, it's exactly the same experience. You go, you fill out this form, you know, the doctor, you know, you have to phone up online, you can't even book online, you gotta call them up to basically book an appointment. You don't walk out with any information, it's still sitting like, maybe it's on a disk or it's on a computer, but roughly speaking, you don't get any access to that thing. You go to another physician, a specialist to kind of, and so you got to do the same test over again. So there's absolutely no change in that. And you think about the digitization of that, all the information is there, it's all digital, but it sits in these silos. So one of the things that we think can happen is at the moment in time where everyone understands that all the health data is your data, right? It's your own personal data. And what you need is you need an ability to kind of take your data across different service providers so that you have a uniform view. It's your healthcare, right? It's yours. And you don't need the friction that's associated with booking new appointments, having to do the retest again. So what we hope that the digital supercluster will do is it'll actually force a bunch of different organizations that have different siloed data to connect that stuff together so you can get a traversal view of everything. And as a patient in the center, your healthcare experience will be fundamentally different. And hopefully will be different than it was when you were a kid. So that's one example of a project that I know will have many different instances over the next 5 years. And with any hope, we can actually demonstrate how healthcare can fundamentally be better here than in other places. And if we do that well, we can start to export that capability to other locations.
Anyone in the room read the Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1? Few people. The concept is pretty simple and obvious. I mean, it's creating disruptive technologies and creating something generally new. So going from 0 to 1 instead of in a vertical line, instead of going from 1 to +1 in a horizontal line. So do you see any disruptive technologies being developed right now here in Vancouver within the Supercluster? And I mean, the innovation in the data industry or the digital tech gives tremendous opportunities, and there are some interesting numbers. Maybe you can share that only 0.5% of all the data has been analyzed so far. So do you see any company working on a really disruptive technology here?
Yeah, you know, as with all predictions on disruptive technologies, they all tend to kind of hit that hype cycle and then you don't quite know how long it's going to take. But I would say there's a few things to really watch here in Vancouver where I think we have an unfair advantage. Certainly there's an awful lot that's going on in 3D and what's happening in VR and AR. I think on the virtual reality and augmented reality side, we do have a bit of a leadership piece there, and that's owing to the fact that we are such a hub for you know, special effects and animation, and we have sort of a greater outsized proportion of the population that understands how to develop experiences in 3D. That then translates into, I think, a mega trend that's going to happen is, you know, everything will at some point have a virtualized twin. And you know, our ability to kind of capture that, develop products around that, I think is ours to lose. The other area I think that Vancouver and BC has probably got some real opportunity around is on blockchain. So you know, in the same way that the models around trust and transactions, you know, and financial tech is just one element of that, but I think virtually every aspect of every you know, transaction, even in healthcare, how blockchain is going to fundamentally change the dimensions on which we disclose information, we use information, how it's actually transmitted to one another. Vancouver actually stands to be among the top, and there's a bunch of companies that are working in both of those that I think in the realm of the digital supercluster will actually get more exposed to real opportunities, and I think we're going to win in those areas.
Okay, great. Looking forward to that.
Oh, I forgot the third one, genomics.
Right.
So genomics is the other big thing that's happening here in BC, and I think genomic data is going to be one where, actually, one of the coolest things over the last couple of years was that Microsoft had a conference, their first Cascadia conference, and they actually brought up Bill Gates and the entire Microsoft board. It was really interesting. So Bill Gates is sitting there on a panel, and the question is, like, what's the coolest disruptive thing that you're seeing? And this is in the context of Cascadia. They're doing a bunch of work with the University of Washington, but now they're doing a bunch of stuff with UBC. And in the genomics world, here was the comment on this, was that, you know, the future of storage is going to be, it's actually going to be stored as DNA strings. So you think about the vast quantity of information that's in your DNA. And we have tried, and the Human Genome Project has unpacked all of the information, or tried to unpack all the information in the human genome. Now imagine using that as a mechanism to store data. Right? That was the mind-blowing thing that he suggested. And I think when you think about that interplay between genomics, because BC has a really good center around genomic research, and you think about data and the application of that I think is a pretty exciting area too.
Can you share some names of companies people should look out for, apply for jobs there, and ride on the wave?
You know, when I get asked that question, oftentimes what I do is I duck it, because what happens is someone says, why didn't you talk about it? So let me duck that.
Well, we have a couple more minutes. You can list all of them.
I could take a while.
All right. Do you guys have any questions for Bill? Yeah.
Hi Bill. My name is Amy, and I'm part of a family business that imports from China. And as of July 8th, we've been slapped with a 25% trade tariff by Donald Trump. So my question is, do you have any advice for e-commerce companies that have very strong ties with China? And these ties are not easily severed. Like, we can't just start importing from Vietnam. And also, how do you think this trade war against China impacts the tech industry, in particular founders that are Chinese American?
Wow, there's a lot to that question. I feel like I'm in the wrong. Yeah, you know what? It's a great question. I'm not sure I'm really qualified to answer it in its fullness, but I'll say a couple of things about it. You know, the idea around, you know, let's say the retaliatory tariffs have been happening, and what do you do as a company when something, you know, it wasn't anything you planned, you're just an innocent victim in that whole scenario? What can you do? There's not, the options for you are limited to really looking at how you diversify the markets that you go after. And that's the same thing with, it's the only solution that you have. Unless you've got a backbone right into the Trump office and you can kind of change his mind, which I don't think any of us do, you know, you're going to have to live with that, you know, as a near-term risk to your business. And it's an unforeseen risk, and it's going to get factored into your market capitalization or your market valuation and what your prospects look like. And the best way to do that is figure out a diversification strategy, either geographically or in a market or in a product area that will allow you to kind of build that out over time. I can't remember your other question.
How does this affect the tech industry? And also, how does it affect founders that are Chinese American?
Well, first of all, if you're Chinese American, you should become Chinese Canadian. So let's start there. Which I am, so I would vouch for that. And then I think, how does it affect tech companies here? Well, I think we can't be complacent that stuff like that's not going to happen to Canadian tech companies too. I think where we're going to see a lot of friction in the NAFTA discussions is whether or not, you know, the ease by which we send people back and forth across the border, we kind of take for granted. any of us who've driven across in the last year has probably felt an awful lot more questioning than we used to feel across the border, right? It's going to intensify. So, you know, you're going to have to think more about how is it that you're going to actually get across. And it's still, right now, way faster to kind of fly. Like, you don't have any clearance issues when you fly versus when you drive. It's going to affect people who are actually doing stuff that's closer in than it is people moving further out. So if you got an office in Bellingham or in Seattle or whatnot, just be prepared. That's going to be a point of friction in how you operate your business. I don't anticipate it's going to affect capital flows. I think capital flows are going to be fine. It's not like they're going to put new taxation pieces. It's entirely about people. And so there's a good and bad to that. I think what it may do, as it has for the last few years, is actually make Canada a far more attractive place where people want to be, as opposed to the US. So build on that. Like, if we together have a narrative that says how great it is to build tech companies here in Canada or in Vancouver or what have you, and we say that with enough veracity, well, we will kind of get more than our fair share of people that will want to be here.
Question here?
I was interested when you said that data about your health is your data. Can you speak more about that, maybe if you like, in context of Facebook and Google and the recent controversies?
Yeah, and I think this is a great question, because I think what happens is that the Facebook piece really kind of exposed the issue that we don't really understand what we're agreeing to in some cases when we say yes. But what it should do is actually also cause us to think a little bit about who we're entrusting with the information, and whether or not that trust also provides some restrictions on how we would like to operate. So the best example is, today I will differentiate between ownership of data and stewardship of data. So today the government is a steward of your data. They don't own your health data. You own your health data, yet you never have access to your health data, right? If you wanted to check your medical history on all the visits you had, how many hoops do you have to jump through to get to that? Now, they're stewards of your data. They have the data. You can't get your own data out of that. That's the challenge that we have. Now, when you do have access to the data, it also should open up opportunities for you to consciously give permissions for data to be used. So what we haven't yet figured out in the new data economy is how you can use, like it happens right now with Facebook and Google all the time, by giving permission for it. They're able to monetize your data in a way that maybe you didn't fully agree to, but in some cases maybe you fully agree to because you're getting some benefit on the other side. That does not happen today with health data, right? So if you participate in a clinical trial of something, yes, you're getting paid for that, but if you said, hey, if you anonymize my information and the clinical information, the lab information was such that I'm fully anonymized, but I'm prepared to contribute that data for research purposes or for this particular test or for some longitudinal population study that they're trying to do. And for that benefit, maybe there's a fraction of a penny or a couple of pennies that you get, and you do this over and over again, and you find a way to monetize it, whether you're monetizing it or you're doing it because you're contributing towards something that you feel is important, like you're finding a cure for leukemia or you're doing something like that. You have the benefit in the case where it's your data to say yes. Today, we don't have that ability to say yes. So that's the analogy I'm trying to use.
I don't know if this next.
Hi, my name is Felicity, and I just came back to Vancouver after spending a year working in Shenzhen, which is considered like the tech hub in China, and working for a STEM educational products company. So my question is, what do you see like the future for, in terms of the resources that dedicate to help students to actually reach their startup projects to an actual realization of an actual company and products? Because I noticed that in Shenzhen they have a lot of initiatives that support students. I guess for Vancouver now I see the resources are pretty limited in terms of helping student node. And also my second question is, you mentioned about fintech. So I'm a little bit surprised as I compare both cities. where in Shenzhen you can just walk out with a phone and you can pretty much pay for everything with your app, Alipay or WeChat. And I saw like Apple Pay was trying here in the North American market, but it didn't get really spread out. And what's your observation for e-payment kind of development? And do you see like there's an opportunity maybe to develop some kind of a e-payment systems or app that could help better people's life and make it easier for them, like to live in a wallet-free society?
Yeah, I would, thanks for the question, Felicity. I wouldn't mind if Uber actually worked here, right? So, I mean, let's start there. So the two parts of the question, I'll say, there's a few folks, like I know Reza over here from VMworks could probably tell you a little bit about the trials and tribulations of how the financial systems work, but that's not an excuse. It's just some of the impediments happen to be the networks that are here, and I think I have seen Alipay accepted in more places lately than, let's say, a year ago. And Apple Pay and everything else, there's always a scale question. And when you have incumbent players like Benares and some of the existing players in the banking system, it creates some barriers to the other alternatives. And the speed at which they operate is a little bit different. So my belief in all that is that in time, all that stuff will change for the better, but sometimes in small markets like Canada, it takes longer than it probably should. Everything always moves faster in places like China than it does in Canada, and it gets to your second question around students and support. I think one of the things that is kind of tough in this environment is like we attract an awful lot of people to study here. A lot of those people want to stay here, they want to find jobs here, they want to build their lives here. We also have lots of people that are from here, they go through school, they're looking for opportunities. There's constantly a kind of a gap in the match piece, largely because there needs to be more work integrated experiences as part of the whole education piece. And the challenge is that it hasn't traditionally been part of the framework for the post-secondary education system here. It is in places like this, why you hear Waterloo is always kind of touted as the top university. But it isn't. I mean, from the standpoint of, and I don't want to offend anyone who went to Waterloo. Is anyone Waterloo grad? Okay, thank God I'm not offending anyone. So Waterloo, from an education perspective, is roughly the same as everywhere else. But the difference is that they integrate the learning, the co-op stuff right from the very beginning. So by the time you get to third year, you're already sort of, you're a junior developer working at Google or Facebook or someplace like that. So by the time you finish, my God, you got all of this experience. They're not hiring because you're smarter than everyone else. They're hiring because you've got that experience. And that's one of the things that we worked on a lot with the government to say, look, we need to actually integrate more work, integrated experiences for students here. That will be the recipe for ensuring, because if you're running a startup, you're 10 people. Generally the excuse is, look, I have difficulty enough hiring people. I don't have the resources to hire a student because I can't support them, can't train them. Well, that's just an excuse, right? It can be done, provided that there's the right conditions to do that. And that's where you have both sides of that equation. You have to have the universities and they are. There's a lot more placements for co-op and work integrated learning. And I think for small companies and startups, there's a lot more support systems for them to kind of have offset costs in order to do that. We do that more. Students get more support. They'll want to stay here. They'll build companies here. It'll be a much better environment. But I'd say we're still in the relatively early stages of making that happen.
I'm just going by proximity over here.
Hey Bill, do you see a disparity between the way that Canadian investors value companies versus US investors? And if there is a disparity, are companies like the organizations like Supercluster doing anything to bridge that gap?
So the question is, do I see a disparity between US startup companies and Canadian startup companies?
Not the companies, but the way that Canadian investors value those companies versus US investors.
Wow, it sounds like you're going through an experience yourself. Is that right?
Dipping our toes in yet.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, generally speaking, I think one of the things is that if you compare valuations for companies especially Vancouver versus the Valley. It's a night and day comparison, right? So if you're raising your angel round, your pre-revenue, you might have sort of an early product concept. Here you might get a valuation on a pre-money basis between, let's say, $1.5 million to $3 million, right? Down in the Valley, you could get a valuation that's between 5 and 10, right? That's the rough math. Now, if you're in any other city in the US, you're probably in the same range as what you're in Canada. So you'd still be $1.5 million to 3 if you're doing a deal, let's say in Chicago, or you're doing a deal in Atlanta, or like the most robust capital markets are in the Valley. There's no question about it. One of the things that often happens though is that if you're raising money, you're really trying to forecast out how many raises you're going to do. I always make companies I work with, I always make them go through a modeling exercise, because at the end of the day, evaluation is an artificial piece. What matters at the end of it is after you've raised all the money that you need in successive tranches that you need to raise them at, what's your stake look like in 3 years, right? That's the most important metric, not the glam show of I got a $10 million valuation today on an idea. Because what happens is that the world comes crashing down. If you have too high a valuation, you can't support it on the evidence of your execution on it. It's actually a world of pain. So my advice on that stuff is, worry about the long game, but in the short game, you're kind of constrained with supply on the capital side, irrespectively, and you're really trying to outshine the others that are competing for the same dollars that are here. So in the long run, for entrepreneurs that are doing stuff here, my advice is typically this: have optionality, right? More than one investor is interested in your deal. At some point, what's the most important thing in selecting the investor is not the value that you get on the deal, but rather whether you're getting married to these people, right? So you want to make sure that they're going to be there in the long run. And with the limited supply of capital that's here, you got to make sure that when you sign them on, that if things don't go perfectly, because they never do, that they're still going to be there with you, and that you didn't sell them something that was worth like a $10 million deal, but really is only worth millions tomorrow, and they're going to run like the wind on the other side of the deal. You want something that's reasonable, you want them to be with you on the next one, even if it doesn't go so well, and you want them to bring their friends into it that you can trust and you can do that business with. That's the beauty of smaller markets like Vancouver, is that you can kind of do that stuff, and it's still very much of a neighborhood kind of thing. In the Valley, believe me, they'll drop you like a ton of bricks, the minute it's not going right. And I won't say that universally. I mean, there's always lots of exceptions, but that's what I would characterize it. So there's really, if you've got a good idea and you're kind of working on that, that would be the advice I'd give you.
Okay, do you guys need a break? No? Okay. It's, okay.
So you mentioned that being the only person in a startup kind of goes against you when they're developing a company. What sort of advice would you have for someone who's wants to start a company but may not have a big purse to hire 10 people immediately and is looking at a VC to maybe help out?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's a chicken and egg issue, right? How can you bring on other people if you don't have money, and then if you don't have the money? But so this is why the networking stuff and the community building stuff is so important. Oftentimes, when you find someone else who's passionate about your idea, they're going to come in as a co-founder, right? The compensation stuff matters a little bit less when you can find the right co-founder to do stuff with. That's more the issue around risk to an investor, and even for your own sanity. What you often find is if you're in the ride on your own, it's super hard. And then the investors know that too. So they know that you're going to need someone alongside with you. That's the point. If you are doing it on your own, I'd always encourage founders who are working on stuff, even if you've got it going, to see what you can do to find a partner at some point, right? So it's not that it's not like nobody will invest in you if you're a singular founder. It's just on a scorecard where maybe there's 10 different items. It's just one that you didn't score 100% on, right? It doesn't mean you can't overcome it. It's not a death knell, but it's certainly something people
Hi, Bill. So back to your comment on you mentioned one of the graduates who had the race had a much greater chance of getting a job. So with the success of all these boot camps that are popping up all around the city, and all the software developers that they're putting into the community around us, building like mobile apps and web apps, which doesn't require a 4-year degree of computer science or engineering, where do you see computer science and community programming university going to be like 10 years because of this competition with these boot camps?
That's probably a question for the Dean of Computer Science at some of these schools, right? You know, even though, so I go back to the story of doing an engineering degree, and you'd say, well, actually, I practiced engineering for about 1.5 years, and I haven't used it since. I still carry the badge. And you say, well, what was the point of that? You could have probably done what you did without that. And in hindsight, I'd say, no, not exactly. And I'd say the same for doing, boot camps versus, full courses or full degrees on computer science and whatnot. It's actually the challenge you go through in a full degree program is a set of problem solving exercises that force you to kind of learn different disciplines. So it's one thing to, in 8 weeks, learn how to build a website, maybe some apps or whatnot. It's not necessarily, if you want to be, I know, by the way, as a CTO, CTOs are always looking for people who have breadth of thinking and can actually work through problem sets that are far more than just, can you write these lines of code? And that's, I think, where the difference is. So if you're really just looking for a job, go and do that. But if you're looking for like a long-term career, then upgrade and do more and go back into those types of programs.
All right, in the interest of time, we'll take one more question.
Hi, Bill. My name is Riti, and I have a few ideas that I'm trying to turn into apps, and I have some money to develop them. And I want to know when's the best time to actually start a company, like actually register one.
Well, the best time to start a company is always now. But you do that already. It all depends on your personal circumstances, right? So I think what a lot of people have, if their financial situation is one where they can't take the full leap, is they'll do stuff on the side until such time that they feel that they've got enough footing. I think John was saying at Founder Institute, they're really kind of focusing on people who are going to do it full time. And I think it's important it's an important filter for when you go on board a ride like Founder Institute or any cohort-based program. You have to have the ability to not have other obligations. And it doesn't matter whether it's Founder Institute or whether you're doing a Y Combinator program or what have you, that's what they're looking for. For me, I think I had the benefit that I had enough support around me that I could do that and I could take a run at it, knowing that I could always go back. And if you have that assurance, then I'd say, try it, give it a go.
It's a fun journey. Sometimes. Up and downs, right? Okay, thank you so much, Bill. Big round of If you haven't met someone new in this room here, I really, really encourage you to do that now.